Hello and welcome to Dialogue. Growth is gaining momentum across Asia despite the risks posed by COVID-19. A new report from the Asian Development Bank forecasts that the region will rebound to 7.3% growth in 2021 and 5.3% in 2022. So what will be the keys of Asia's economic recovery? Will COVID-19 continue to overshadow the process? What do 2021 and 2022 look like for the Chinese economy? And why is financing a green and inclusive recovery so important? To discuss all these issues and more, I'm very happy to be joined in the first half of our program by Yasuyuki Sawada, Chief Economist of the Asian Development Bank. In the second half, we'll be joined by Liu Zhiqun, Senior Fellow with the Chongyang Institute at Renmin University, and Steve King, crowd-funded Professor of Economics on Patreon. That is our topic. I'm Wang Guan. Dr. Sawada, thank you for joining us. According to the ADB report that you and your colleagues co-authored, economic growth in developing Asia is set to rebound to 7.3% this year. What are the main drivers of growth?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for having me this evening. Major driving force of this seemingly very strong recovery, 7.3%, is basically China. China's strong rebound, 8.1% growth this year, supported by a domestic consumption rebound and investment recovery, and also especially a very strong export last year, second half, started from PPEs and medical equipment, and then later on last year, electronics products production and export really supported the strong Chinese economic recovery. So that's the one major driving force behind this overall Asia's strong rebound.
Right. The report also says that South Asia will have the fastest growth this year, after suffering the region's sharpest contraction in 2020. But given the situation in India and many other nations, they're still battling, COVID-19 and the resurgence of the virus. Do you still believe that South Asia will lead the growth?
Yes. While again, overall Asian growth is driven by East Asia, especially PRC. But in terms of ranking of economic growth, South Asia total more than 9% growth rate. So, and also India, 11% growth we envision this year. So what's the reason behind this? So I think 11% is achievable and realistic, but the one element behind this is a deep recession last year in South Asia, especially in India, minus 8.0% growth last year. And starting from this low baseline and recovery this year, that's one reason behind 11%. And also, although this is a worrisome situation, seeing increasing number of COVID cases in India, but actually containment measures in India now are more selective and targeted if we compare large-scale lockdown last year. And this is less costly for the economy, and also vaccine rolling out. And India has been doing a quite good job, 3 million doses per day. And this is on track to hit the target of vaccinating 300 million by August, and also achieving probably a large-scale immunity by fiscal year 2022. So all that together, I think 11% of Indian growth and more than 9% of South Asian growth is reasonable. Having said this, we do flag continued outbreak as a significant downside risk. So we're going to closely monitor the situation and revisit our forecast in later Asian development outlook, July, September, and December. So we're going to potentially update the growth number for South Asia.
Yeah. Dr. Sawada, how big a factor is COVID? I mean, when you compiled this report and this forecast, what kind of scenarios of vaccination and COVID-19 progress have you factored in when you make those economic forecasts?
Yes, basically we consider COVID trajectory and also rolling out of vaccination explicitly. Basically, we follow. Our basic assumption is government roll outing a vaccination plan. That's our baseline assumption. So it depends on the country. This year, maybe high-income developing Asian Pacific can achieve substantial vaccination later this year. Some country may take another year or even 2 years. So we factored in as a baseline this vaccination rolling out progress.
Right. The ADB report also says that the region's economic growth will moderate to 5.3% in 2022. I mean, other than the larger base number of 2021, presumably, what are the other factors that may contribute to this moderation?
Yes, actually, again, more than 50% of Asian growth is driven by China. So actually, a growth moderation next year to 5.3% is actually mainly driven by Chinese growth rate moderation. Once return back to the normal growth trajectory or pre-COVID-19 trend, then I think it's natural to see moderation, especially for China. Long-term transformation and so-called rebalancing of the economy from domestic demand, from export-driven to domestic demand-driven transformation has been already ongoing, and also manufacturing sector-driven growth transformed into service sector growth to support the people's livelihood. So I think this rebalancing has been ongoing. And also, it's usually natural to see once country successfully climbing up the ladder of development from middle income towards the high income, then it's natural to see convergence of and also moderation of growth rate. So I think this is a very natural consequences of Chinese successful development in the past.
Right. In this ADB report, Dr. Sawada, you forecast that China will grow 8.1% this year, and the growth rate will slow to 5.5% for the year 2022. What are the risks and perhaps the opportunities too for the Chinese economy going forward?
Actually, this China's continued growth is mainly driven by domestic demand, consumption, and investment, as well as a very strong export. So I think this is a positive element. As for the risks, I can point out the two major potential risks. Number one is financial vulnerabilities. Chinese government already gradually started consolidating the budget. But I think it's very important to support the safeguard and the smooth recovery, especially banks' non-performing loans ratio. We expect that will increase and posing some challenges. And safeguarding financial stability requires better NPL management and orderly consolidation of the bank sector, and in some cases, strengthening bank capitalization. I think these things are needed. So really, authorities should help banks address their looming non-performing loans in order to mitigate systemic risk. Another source of risk is U.S.-China political tension. Biden administration did not signal sweeping changes in trade relationship with the PRC. So I think this U.S.-China trade conflict will continue in some form, and especially policies in both the countries to increase self-reliance in key sectors, especially the technology sector, could further contribute to PRC-U.S. decoupling. So these are the two main potential risks to the Chinese economic outlook.
Yeah, we also know that ADB has been promoting green and inclusive growth, really to go in line with the Sustainable Development Goals specified by the United Nations. How important is it for nations to pursue this green and sustainable path going forward?
So I think Asia and also around the globe, countries and economies are facing an enormous challenge by COVID-19. But I think this is also a good opportunity for the countries to engage major policy reform. Admittedly, Asia's past 4 or 5 decades development has been built on growth faster and then clean up later strategy. So more than half of the greenhouse gas emission is from Asia, and also Asia's major energy source more than half is based on coal power plant. So I think there is a huge room for Asia to transform itself from a brown type of economy to more green type of economy. So I think that this is a very important moment for Asia to engage environmental friendly, building back greener type of major policy reform. And in order to achieve MDGs or SDGs right now, according to a UNICEF UN SCAP study, 1.5 trillion US dollars, that scale of funding is needed to building back greener and building back more inclusive. So I think it's very important both private sector and public sector work together to fill in this necessary funding for a green recovery.
Right. In this report, talking about building back better, you said there needs to be, better impact measurement. The standards for impact metrics are not really there. How important is it for us to measure our ability, to achieve what we have achieved?
Yes, as I said, 1.5 trillion US dollars per year, and that investment is necessary to achieve building back greener and more inclusive. And unfortunately, because of COVID-19, public resources, falling public revenues, tax revenues, and also increasing spending caused by pandemic, we cannot really rely on 100% public sources. So tapping a private resources is really critical. And fortunately, there is a very strong private sector appetite for green and social finance. 30 trillion US dollars, or 1/3 of all investment managed globally, is now guided by ESG objectives and principles, environment, social, and governance, ESG objectives. So in order to guide private finances, I think government can really play a very important role to develop market ecosystem and market infrastructure. So setting a common standard for transparent information disclosure and impact measurement is really necessary. It's really a core component of a market infrastructure and ecosystem to tap private resources for green and inclusive recovery.
Right. And then how do you see the role of China in financing a green and inclusive recovery?
Indeed, China has been a regional leader in green finance. China is the largest green bond market in Asia right now. It's one of the actually founding member of network of central banks and supervisors for greening. So China can play a really critical role, and China basically can foster further development of green and social finance through regional cooperation collaboration by establishing, for example, regional market practice, which is quite relevant for other Asian countries, and also aligned with the international standards and best practice. So I think China can further develop more instruments on social finance, green finance, in order to support inclusive and resilient growth, not only for China, but also other countries and economy in the Asian Pacific region.
Dr. Yasuyuki Sawada, Chief Economist of the Asian Development Bank, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Welcome back to Dialogue. We're now joined by Liu Zhiqin, Senior Fellow with the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies at Renmin University of China. Professor, so good to have you back on Dialogue. About Asia's economic growth, we've just heard from one of the authors of this ADB report, forecasting a growth of 7.3% in 2021. Do you see that happening?
Yes, I think so. The report from the ADB is quite positive and also still within the expectation of the public. As we know that the actual situation in China is well developing now. It's the major driving force in the global economic recovery. Of course, the forecast for this year is 8.1% by ADB, but the next year is something somewhat lower than the expectation. But I think for the cautious prediction from ADB is still quite acceptable. Because as we know, the ADB's research is always based on the facts and also on serious investigation. So quite professional, I have to say. So in this way, we have to find out the right way to overcome all the possible and the hidden difficulties we will meet in the time to come. But for the forecast of this year, we see that still cautious for 7.3% as the forecast in the ADB report announced. But we have to find the potential of development to overcome all these uncertainties that it may occur in the economic scenario. Because as we know that there are still many uncertainties ahead, so we have to find out the right way and the measures and cooperate with all other countries together to overcome and to take a good job for this economic recovery.
Yeah, it does take nations working together. Steve King, crowd-funded professor of economics on Patreon. Good to have you back, Professor King. How do you look at this 7.3% growth forecast by ADB? Do you think this is too conservative?
No, I think we're still very much in the woods with COVID. We can see what's happening with India right now. There are outbreaks happening all the time. The virus has still not been defeated completely. I think it'd be quite naive to factor the COVID out for the remainder of 2021. So I think it's any growth forecast should be conservative for this year. It's better to err on the wrong side than to generate false optimism about 2021.
Yeah, Professor Lee, how do you look at the growth forecast of Asia compared with other countries, other continents rather, of the world, for example, Europe and America?
You know, as we know that in the past 20 years, Asia is always playing as a new star arising in the economic recovery in global market. So I have to say that the Asian market is still remains very popular, very dynamic, very promising, because of the innovation movement in Asia is very, very strong. So that's why all countries that they have the inclusive strategy to develop and to cooperate with each other. They have no serious and real conflicts in between. That's why the Asia countries can be always well united and well managed their risk. So that's why the Asia development is always very promising, play a very positive role in the global economy. During the past 2 years, in the difficult times, Asia countries are still very important to the whole world. We can see that the economic recovery is quite stable. And also the people here, although the society order remain also very safe. That's why the people here enjoy the life and also they get back their jobs and overcome all the difficulties. So they meet this dynamic the problems. If they can solve all these problems, I think the Asian countries can do much better than ever before. So in the time to come, I think Asian countries will have more driving force, and also they will take very positive and good measures to develop their own economy. So in this way, we're quite positive and optimistic here.
Right. You know, Professor Keen, you know, if you're just joining us right now, I would like to let you know that just now we're talking to Dr. Sawada, Chief Economist from Asian Development Bank, one of the authors of this report, and he told us that he was concerned about one thing, that is geopolitical tensions, namely China-U.S. Potential tech wars, tech confrontations, no matter however you call them. Are you concerned too that China-U.S. trade and technological confrontations may hamper the progress of global economic recovery?
Yes, I am. I think it's not as bad as under Trump, obviously, but there is a strong desire for America to relocate production back to its own shores. And this is actually recognizing that China, in that particular contest, China did very well. America did very poorly. because a large part of the industrialization of China was driven by American corporations taking advantage of what used to be low wages in China. Of course, China has turned that into acquiring Western technology, then advancing on Western technology, and now you're getting a very imperial reaction from the Americans. They don't believe they should be second to anyone, and I think there's a lot of irrationality in the American reaction there, which is unlikely to go away. So those tensions are going to be there, probably because China is succeeding rather than any other reason.
Yeah, Professor Liu, you know, the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee just passed a strategic competition bill. You know, I read the bill, 281 page. That is a big chunk of the deal is really about moving American companies offshores away from China and preventing more Chinese tech companies from investing in the United States. And we thought the Democratic Party, the Joe Biden administration, the Democrats would be for free trade and for globalization instead of against it. Are you concerned about such moves?
Yes, I think so. I think not me alone, but many people in China have great concerns about possible measures to be taken by the American government, especially by the American industrial circle. If they really follow this bill, that to build up a firewall against China or prevent China from its developing economies, that will be a great serious damage not only to China but also to the global economy. For point one is that if the people's exchange between two countries is interrupted, that will a big loss not only for China but also for USA, especially for the technology field. And secondly, from the commodity business also. In America, I have to say, in the past 40 years, they have enjoyed a better life that with China's rising, especially from China's export, the lower, cheaper, high-quality products that have supported Americans' best life in the past years. So now, if they interrupted this inter-exchange between the two countries, I think the people in America will first suffer the difficulties and also some problems as before. That's why during the pandemic period, 1 year and later, 1 year and a half, that America still not get ready to prevent the outbreak of the pandemic. So this is the problem. So if they interrupted and stopped the connections with China, I think the United States will be in the first line to be suffered. Not only China, also will shock the whole global economy stability.
Professor Keen, do you share that sentiment? Are you worried as well? Do you have anything to add?
Well, I think what we're seeing actually, this is the decline of one emperor and the rise of another, so we should see it in that light. And if you go back to the 1800s, there was an immense class conflict in England, which was addressed largely driven by Wakefield, by saying we have to develop colonies and use the colonies to raise the income so we can pay our English workers decent wages out of effectively colonial surplus. Now, what that ultimately meant was the decline of English industry, and English industry is now utterly uncompetitive on the global scale. I think America did a similar thing by taking advantage of cheap Chinese wages and exporting its production off to China, thereby driving its working class into effective poverty. And that's where a lot of the class conflict in America is coming from now. And the anger about China actually comes from the working poor in America, who are now quite a substantial part of the population. So I don't think America benefited out of it. I think American capitalists did. I think the American financial sector benefited out of it, but the American working class did not. And now you're getting a political backlash over that, which you're seeing both in the Trump administration and in Biden.
Right. Let's talk about what we're talking about today, the economy, Asia's economy and the economy of China. China's GDP soared 18.3% in the first quarter of 2021 from a year ago, but is still slightly lower than 19% forecast. Going forward, Professor Liu, what would you identify as the biggest challenges for the Chinese economy?
I think the biggest challenge for Chinese economy is the internal policy, If the internal policy remains stable, I think that China will have a positive future and a very promising development in the time to come. Because, you know, China development a successful story always based on its consistent, reliable, and sustainable policy. So this is the key element for the Chinese success. Of course, the second problem is that the international environment, whether the geopolitical tensions still remain and whether the Western major countries can be cooperated and collaborated with China. We think together, we do the job together, we work together and cooperate together. I hope that the global economy will be further developing, but only when the tension outside still have negative impact on China. China will have more difficulties, especially for the export business, and I think China will meet some more challenges. But there's no way out. China can deal with all these challenges and difficulties as before.
Professor Kane, what do you think are the biggest headwinds and uncertainties facing the Chinese economy?
I think without a doubt it's climate change. We humans have in general drastically underestimated the dangers of climate change. Economists like William Nordhaus are a major reason as to why they've done that. But I think the corporate sector and global governments, because they've been lulled into a false sense of security about the damages climate change will do to the economy, have done nowhere near enough. And there'll be a need to rapidly pivot to drastically reduce our carbon dioxide output, but also to try to reduce our pressure on the planet. So I think that's the main challenge every country faces. And of course, China is the fastest growing part of the global economy right now. We'll have to be most ready to address that, change direction, I think actually reduce its rate of growth, ensure a most fair share of the distribution of income within China, and then try as rapidly as possible to move across to zero carbon. Those are the main changes that every country on the planet faces, but especially China.
But given the political climate in Washington, do you think the Biden administration and Beijing can effectively work to tackle climate change?
I think no country in the world really realizes just how bad this is going to be. I regard COVID as basically an opening sortie by the climate back on humanity. And when we realize just how much we've overstretched the planet, we'll realize we'll need drastic action. In that sense, I think China is probably better prepared to do something about it, because if they're zone over COVID, central direction, central control is far better at addressing systemic threats like COVID and indeed climate change. And I think in that case, just as the Americans should have learned from China about COVID, they're going to have to learn from China about climate too.
Professor Liu and Professor Steve King, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you, gentlemen, for your insight. And that would do it for this edition of Dialogue. Thank you for watching. I'm Wang Wen in Beijing.